Welcome to the Village Well podcast, brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. Hello and welcome to the Village Well podcast, formerly known as Shelf Talkers. After a year of production, we made the decision to retire its cute name, Shelf Talkers, and start calling it the Village Well podcast. We hope this will make it easier for people to find us so we can grow our following. As always, we're recording at Village Well Books and Coffee in Culver City, California. I'm your host, Jennifer Casper. This week, we're trying something completely new. Rather than interviewing authors or community members about books and reading, we're bringing you a slice of life to let you hear how things have been over here this year. And I wanted to let you know that we recorded most of this episode about a month ago, a couple weeks after the devastating wildfires that ripped through and destroyed big chunks of our city. With everything that's been going on, it's taken us a minute to get this one together. That said, we have big ideas for this podcast going forward, and in the coming weeks, we look forward to bringing you more regular content, including our mainstay, interviews with authors about books, and adding in conversations from the various book groups that meet here at Village Well, as well as conversations with our sales representatives from our various publishers. So for this episode, we're going to talk to you about the fires, which were a big deal. While we're about 10 miles away from the Palisades and further away from Altadena, we all know many people who have been directly and indirectly impacted by the wildfires. And it's really colored the day-to-day life in the shops since they started. We decided to interview staff and customers about their experiences in the fire. Some of them had harrowing escapes, some of them lost everything, and some of them were just interacting with people who were close to the fires. They all had unique reactions ranging from sadness to fear to dark humor, but the common theme was the importance of leaning on one another in such a hard time. Whether we were impacted directly or indirectly, everyone is still grappling with the fallout from these fires, and sharing these stories is an important part of how we heal. After that, we're going to bring you book recommendations to help you find your way into two topics that this disaster has made interesting: fires and grief. So we're going to start by talking to Josh Stretton Carlson. Josh came on board as the producer of this podcast a couple months ago. We're so happy to have him on our team. Josh, you are the member of our team that probably had the closest interaction with the fires.
Yeah. I'm from LA, born and raised. I grew up in Malibu. My brother grew up in the Palisades, and my folks have since moved back to the Palisades. So really our whole community and my sense of California, of Los Angeles, is all rooted in the area that was most affected by these fires. I'm very fortunate that I now live in an apartment in Culver City. My brother is in Echo Park. My oldest brother lives in Northern California, so we were all okay. And my parents were very fortunate that their house is still standing, but they live basically at ground zero of the fire. And the fact that it missed them is honestly a miracle. I mean, they live in the Highlands. If you look at the map of which houses are destroyed, the fire literally passed above them and below them. And just by some miracle, it's still there.
You were one of the first people I talked to who had a direct connection to someone who was in the path of the fire. So what was that day like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was really scary. I remember talking to my dad in the morning, and there was a small fire. I mean, for context, so I grew up in Malibu. I probably evacuated from fires about 4 or 5 times growing up. The house I grew up in, my parents bought the property, and it was a burned out lot from the 93 fire. So fire is just kind of a fact of life for a lot of us who grew up in the Santa Monica Mountains. And they were pretty calm about it when it started, because a lot of the time, I mean, I've literally been at their house when a small fire starts, helicopter comes, puts it out, it's over. So they were watching the smoke and they were thinking that's what was going to happen. But there was hurricane level.
They weren't going to panic.
Right, exactly. There was hurricane level wind, so they couldn't get the helicopters to dump water. So they were pretty relaxed about it. They were like, we're going to stay here. We're going to keep an eye on it. And really, it took my brother and I, my brother called them and I texted them. We were like, you guys need to get out. They're very smart about these things, but I just want to give you context that this happens all the time. So it might sound weird, but we're a little callous to it, And so they decided to get out. They jumped in the car, grabbed, passports, birth certificates, legal stuff, race down the Highlands. For folks not from LA, there's only one road out of the Highlands. And they drove down it, and literally 20 minutes later, we have friends who live right above them, and they couldn't get out because the fire had crossed the road.
And was burning in the middle of the road.
They were totally encircled by fire.
So was the asphalt burning, or was there a tree lying in the road that was burning?
It's all hills and brush, and it was just like burning across the road. And cars were burning.
Inconceivable.
Yeah. And their friends literally thought they were going to be trapped and burnt by these fires. And somehow LAFD, just absolute heroes who are doing this work, often for days on end with no sleep. So they managed to get the fire out across the road, and everyone was able to get out of the Highlands. But those photos you saw on Twitter of all those cars piled up and people just fleeing on foot, that's at the bottom of where my parents live.
And were they fleeing because the fire was in the road and they couldn't pass in their car?
There was so many people trying to get out that it created this logjam, and the fire was literally right there. It was about to like engulf everyone in their cars.
Yeah.
And the firefighters just said, go, just get out and run down to the ocean.
Yeah.
And so if my parents had left, 20 minutes later,
they would have been in that.
They would have, and they're older folks, and it just is so real and so scary. And so that the house I grew up in Malibu is just toast. It's just a skeleton, and it's just beams. And I'm telling people, like, I'm in the best case scenario where I lost the house that my parents no longer live in. Their current house is still standing, but it's covered in so much ash that's full of, lead and asbestos and treated wood. And, it's not ash from trees. It's ash from residential.
From other homes,
and
treated, all the chemicals that go into that.
Exactly.
And
so they
been
can't,
able to go inside?
No, they can't go home because, they can't have their clothes. They're covered in toxins. They can't recover anything. It's going to be thousands of dollars to clean it. It's hazardous materials, and they can't get their insurance company on the phone, like a lot of folks are having trouble with. They're holed up in a hotel right now. But, this is the best case scenario. And I think about so many of my closest friends who have lost everything.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what people are going through right now.
Yeah. But we are nonstop imagining it.
Yes. And
did your parents have pets?
No, but we did, like, when I was growing up, we had dogs and cats, and there was a couple times where it was like, Josh, get in the car. We're leaving in 15 minutes. There's a fire up the road in Malibu. And, none of them came close to us. None of them were like this. But
this fire was so unprecedented. The hurricane force winds that continued for so long really created a firestorm like Los Angeles has not seen in a century, at least.
Yeah, I mean, bigger than the Chicago fire, which is taught in U.S. history. It's bigger than the entire size of Manhattan. And I mean, like, the entire community where I grew up is just gone. And like, even though my parents' house is still there, half the neighborhood is gone.
Yeah.
All the neighborhood in the lower Palisades is gone. The school, like, is damaged. Like, it just will never be the same. And the only thing that's getting me through this right now is seeing all these people who I haven't spoke to in years reach out.
Yeah.
Is me reaching out to friends I haven't talked to since high school.
Yeah.
All of us are leaning on each other. None of us are okay. But in that, we're all able to be there for each other. And even if it's just to commiserate, and even if it's just to, talk about how hard this is for our families and our parents.
Yeah.
Just having people to listen to me, and for me to be there and lend an ear to other people who need to be listened to,
for sure,
has been getting me through this.
Yeah.
Like, this is one of the worst times of my life, and just being here every day and like talking to people, even if what we're talking about is depressing, even if we're talking about the fires, like just being around people and like holding space with people, and it's been nice for me too.
What you say, even if we're just talking about the fires, so, I mean, the truth is that people who have been through this trauma, and like there's capital T trauma that people like your parents went through, racing to get out with their lives. And then there's lowercase trauma that we're all feeling just from being in this environment where so much loss is happening right around us.
Absolutely.
To so many people we know. And we all need to process that. And talking about it is that's how we start processing it. Just, you got to acknowledge what happened. And, you can't hide behind this shameful wall of not confronting it. Maybe if you're listening to this, you can get some comfort in knowing that your stories matter and they need to be told, and people need to hear them.
Absolutely. We're going to get through this together, and telling these stories is part of that.
So now we're going to let you listen in on a conversation I had with one of our regulars, Patrick Meegan, whose daughter Ada had a close experience with the fires. Patrick is a funny guy by personality and by profession. He's a comedy writer, and his lighthearted take on his very independent daughter's experience belied the closeness and intensity of the disaster she averted. So, Patrick, you have a story related to the fires. Can you tell us?
Yeah. So my daughter her name is Ada, and she's 19 years old. And she went out hiking on that Tuesday morning that the fire began. So she started hiking at about 10 a.m. And Los Leones Canyon Trail in the Palisades. And when she was out there for about a half hour, she saw smoke about one canyon over, and she thought, that's weird. Like, it looks like there's a fire, but I don't see any fire trucks or anything. Maybe it's planned or something. She Googled fire Palisades ? And there was no sort of response or anything. But the fire was kind of like over on the other side of like a housing development. And she thought, oh, okay, well, I guess, maybe it's planned, maybe it's leaf burning or something. She didn't know, but she just sort of continued her hike. And then very soon that she saw that fire churn right through that housing development and head her direction. And that obviously was very scary for her. And the smoke itself was just pretty overpowering very rapidly as well. So she thought, okay, well, I should probably head back to the trailhead where her car, which is to say my car, was, and which is to say is still parked. And she headed back, and while she was sort of on her way back, she kind of hooked up with the one other hiker she saw out there, this 65-year-old man. I think his name is Bob, but I never met him, so I don't know, who apparently is like a daily hiker up there. And so she and Bob sort of hung together as they tried to get back to the trailhead where both of their cars are parked. And then they found soon that their path back to the cars was blocked by flame. And
Actual flame across the
and
trail.
Couldn't go any further. And Ada asked herself apparently at one point, this is all me hearing after the fact, is my dad's car worth like trying to run through the flames to retrieve? And the car is a 2005 Scion XB. And so the answer to that question is no, it is not worth running through the flames for. So at that point, they said, all right, it's time to call 911, which they did on Bob's phone because Bob had juice on his phone and Ada's phone was just about out of juice. And so the 911 operator took their location and said, okay, don't move. And, the phone was sort of being handed back and forth between Ada and Bob talking to this 911 operator. And ultimately the 911 operator was like, all right, don't move. Stay right where you are on that trail and we're going to come and get you. And Bob apparently was like, no, to heck with that, because these flames are headed our direction. We're going to go hike the other way to this ranch I know called Tippett Ranch, and you can find us there. And the 911 operator, Ada, could hear the 911 operator, no, don't do that. Don't stay. No, can I please talk to the girl? Put the girl back on the phone. and Ada was handed the phone back and said, don't go with that guy. He doesn't know what he's doing.
Oh, God.
Don't hand the phone back to the guy. But Ada decided, either I go with this person who at this point is the only sort of working line of communication to the world, or I, sort of stay here alone with the flames that are advancing. She said, all right, I'm going to go with this guy and hope he's not lying about this Tippett Ranch thing. So back they hiked the way they had came, away from the trailhead. And Ada said it was very sort of alarming because, the smoke was very thick. She kind of couldn't see anything. And she sort of didn't know, look, over each new rise, over each new sort of turn, in the trail, was she going to run into flames? But they made it back to this ranch where there was, in fact, an LAFD person on post at this ranch, and that person called a truck to give Ada and this Bob guy a lift down to PCH. And so it wasn't until they actually got down to the PCH that I started getting any sort of communication from Ada. I got a text, actually not until like 1:30, saying, I'm fine, just have a crazy hiking story to tell you, maybe a bit until I come back because I went hiking and then a forest fire happened. And now I'm stuck on foot on PCH next to a bus that got stopped because the part of PCH we need to get back home is closed. And my phone is at 15%, but I'm safe. Apparently, at that bus, Ada said it ended up being like a relatively communal sort of atmosphere. So people were sort of sharing granola bars. This was everybody who was sort of like hustled off of that hill and taken down to the PCH was brought to an MTA bus and put on it. And just sort of in various sort of stages of like panic or confusion or boredom or annoyance or whatever. But she said people generally started sharing things with each other, and somebody shared their battery pack with her. So she was able to sort of boost her phone up a little bit.
And I imagine that they're also getting reports of what's happening and the
reports.
Scale of the fire.
Right, but the reports apparently were sort of very sparse and confusing. So she ended up again, off of the text that she was sending me, later that afternoon, we're paused outside of Duke's Malibu because the bus drivers aren't taking us any farther without official direction. We're now far enough from the fire. But that's irritating because Duke's wasn't anyone's final destination. So she said that, people were annoyed and were sort of taking turns going up to the bus driver saying, hey, how long are we going to be sitting here? Like, I have to go to work. I blah, blah, blah. And the bus driver's like, I'm not driving anywhere until I get orders from the president of buses or whatever.
Right.
So ultimately she was, they did finally get their orders, I think around 5 o'clock that afternoon. Ada had gone out for a hike at 10 a.m. to take them up north, up around over the mountains into Calabasas and catch the 101 there, and then over the 405 and then all the way back down to Santa Monica, at which point she got on an Expo Line train and trained back here to Culver City and texted me and was like, hey, can you please come pick me up at the train station? And she had really kept it all together up until that point, and it wasn't until we got home that she was then telling the story to my wife Amy and me that she finally sort of broke down, and cried and
expressed the
the
fear and the worry that she was feeling all that time, but not letting herself.
Exactly. So we're incredibly lucky, right? So many people lost so much in that fire, and some people lost their lives. And fortunately, my daughter did not lose her life or get hurt at all. Yeah. Just had a very scary thing,
She was very close to something.
Yeah.
So destructive.
Exactly. And she may have been one of the very first people to see this fire. Yeah. But, all it cost us is our car, which we'll happily,
would probably
say goodbye to.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for being a good customer. And I'm very, very grateful that this story ended the way that it did.
Oh, thank you so much. I love Village Well. It's a daily part of my life, as you know, because you see me here literally every day.
Every day that I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will just keep on being here.
Thanks, Patrick.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Next, we're going to hear from one of our very friendly booksellers, Peggy Moretti, about her experience talking to one customer in particular right after the fires broke out.
Hey, Peggy. So we're sitting here, and you shared an experience you had with a customer the other day that I thought was really kind of impactful, and would love to share it with folks who are listening.
Certainly. It was the Thursday after the fires erupted, and a woman came to the cash register, and I obviously asked if I could help her. She had a mask on, which was a little different. We've been without masks for a minute. And I could tell from her eyes that there was a sadness to them. And I asked if I could be of assistance, and she passed over to me a cookbook, Ada Lenge's book called Comfort. And in a moment, she shared with me that she was surprised she was buying a cookbook. And I asked why. And she said because she lived in the Palisades and her house burned down and she didn't have a kitchen. And we had a moment of human relations connection, if you will. And I reached out and said I was so sorry for her loss. And she accepted that. And then I took a beat and I said, you know what? Perhaps this is an opportunity where you should manifest cooking. And she said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, you selected a cookbook, and perhaps this will be an opportunity for you to dig deep into some recipes. Do you like to cook? And she said, yes. And she shared that she was an excellent cook. And I said, maybe you take this time then and manifest cooking, and perhaps it won't be in your kitchen, but it would be in somebody else's kitchen. And once things settle, you'll have some recipes. And her eyes filled with tears. And she said, I think I'll use that as my mantra, manifesting cooking in a kitchen. Doesn't have to be my old one, maybe a new one, maybe somebody else's. And then she said, can I give you a hug? And so we both got a little teary, and I'm doing it again. It was just a beautiful moment of human connection. And I look at this cookbook now in the store, and I think of her every time I see it.
You know, that's been a really big takeaway for me, is the way that people show their humanity when they're dealing with the worst case scenario is, it's kind of what's getting me through this right now.
I share your sentiment. I did not lose my home, fortunately, but that's not to say that I don't feel sad and depressed and really devastated for many. And I think as a member of community, we are all impacted in some way or the other. I opened my home to some people who were displaced. Ironically, as I look at this cookbook, I'm not a great cook, but I have found myself cooking as a form of community and sharing for those who are basically sad, and many displaced in one way, shape, or form. One family in particular hasn't lost their home, but they have not been able to get back in, and they don't know the status. And in some way, they have survivor's guilt, but it's not really a great feeling because they don't know, to your point, what they're returning to or when they'll return to it. And I do say that Village Well is a community, and a lot of people who have come in over the past 10 days are coming in because this is a sanctuary and a safe place to interact. And for that, I'm grateful to be a part of this community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, I'm relatively new here. I took over in October with the podcast, but I think Jen has just created so much goodwill and so much community here. And it's honestly been really nice for me to kind of take my mind off things and be here. And even when customers come in and they're chatting about it with us, just commiserating with other people is so helpful. So
I concur.
Thank you for sharing that story with us, and we appreciate it.
Certainly. Thank you, Josh.
We also spoke to Sandra Cooley, one of our lovely customers who's now a regular customer since she's been relocated to Culver City from her home in Malibu, which burned down. I wanted to talk to her because she had stories about not just the harrowing experience of fleeing the fire, but because of the importance to her of books and how beginning to rebuild her collection is helping her cope with losing everything.
All right, so chatting with one of our lovely customers, Sandra. And first of all, just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. Could you talk a little bit about what happened with your home and how are you doing?
I'm doing great being right here in Village Well and feeling surrounded by books and art and kind people. We've lived for 40 years in Sunset Mesa, right by the Getty Villa, and always thought we had a security in having the Getty Villa there. And we've been threatened by fires 6 or 7 times in those 40 years. This was different. The winds were terrible. There were no apparent fire people on the hill. And the sheriff came by and said, "Get out now." And you could see the fire coming down the hill. So I grabbed the dog in one car, and my husband grabbed the cat in the other car, and we drove through flames down to the bottom of the hill, and then had to go north on PCH because I guess south was even worse. But driving north, the hills were on fire, and the fire was moving up the coast. So it was a wake-up call, and when we left, our house was there, and we heard when we got to Cross Creek from someone there that our houses had burned, just in that quick drive up the coast, realizing that you hadn't taken the right things with you and you wish you could go back and do it over, feeling very grateful that we got out with our pets and we were safe for the moment. So it's been a journey. It's been 2 weeks and 1 day, and I'm super happy to be here talking with you. I think one of the things that, upon reflection, for me as an old person looking back, I feel deeply grateful for having what we have and having the means to have a roof over our head and food. And the other thing that has been remarkable has been the incredible kindness of people in our community. People we know, people we don't know. I have like 20 of those stories of really amazing kindnesses. I have another one. It's just a guy I know not all that well who was a librarian. And I said, it just killed me to lose Robert Winter's signed book of his history of art and architecture in LA. And he called back an hour later and said, I've located a signed, Robert Winters signed copy of that book in Van Nuys, and I'm going to go pick it up for you. And I thought, wow, the kindness of strangers. So it's been pretty wonderful. And I think the symbiotic joy of them helping me and me being helped is that we both feel better for the act.
Yeah, it isn't just for the people receiving the care, but it's for the person giving the care too. And that's how we get through this. None of us can do everything, but all of us can do something, no matter what situation you're in.
Yes.
And Sandra, I think there was a quote you wanted to share with us about all of this.
Oh, yeah. Let me pull it up. So the U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, wrote a book called Together, and he said the solution for loneliness is a potluck. But he wrote this wonderful notion about community. Here it is. To build community requires love. Love not as sentimentality, but as a commanding force with the power to build, strengthen, and heal. Love as generosity and kindness. Love as hope and grace. Love as courage. And coming here today to talk with you has given me courage. So thank you.
Well, thanks so much. We appreciate you coming in.
Thanks.
All right, so this is usually the point in the episode where we ask our guest for a few book recommendations. And we wanted to ask our friend Avery, who's been a bookseller here for a while and has read up pretty thoroughly on some wildfire books, for some recommendations for folks looking to learn more or just find something to get through this.
Yeah, so I pulled 5 different books that are about wildfires in one way or another for listeners. And all these books are a little bit different in terms of genre, in terms of what they cover, how they're written, the tone, the style. So my hope is that they cover across all of them a wide range of interests for our readers. So I'll get into the first one. The first book that I picked is a book called The Last Fire Season, A Personal and Pyronatural History by Manjula Martin. This is a book that came out last year, and it's a kind of literary ecological memoir about wildfires in Northern California, particularly in Sonoma County and around the Santa Cruz area. I'm from Northern California. I grew up in Sacramento, so these are kind of closer to home for me. Actually, one of the fires that she writes about is the CZU Lightning Complex fire in Santa Cruz, which happened in 2020, which was a very personal fire for me. I went to college at UCSC in Santa Cruz. Half of my family lives in Scotts Valley. And my cousin, who grew up there, was actually a fireman in CAL FIRE at the time that fire broke out. So he was working on that fire, trying to keep it back, even when it was just a few miles from his family home at certain times. And this book was on a number of year-end best of lists, including those that were published by NPR, Mother Jones, and Esquire. And I think it has an extremely effective publisher blurb for anyone who might be interested. And that blurb is the book is H is for Hawk meets Joan Didion in the Pyrocene. So I think those three elements kind of get across what it's all about. So that's my first recommendation. The second recommendation I have is a book called Fire Weather on the Front Line of a Burning World by John Vaillant. This is also a book that came out last year to a lot of critical acclaim. It was a Pulitzer finalist, a New York Times top 10 book of the year, and a National Book Award finalist. And this book is more of a broad look at how climate change has affected our relationship to fire. So it looks more just at ecology generally over the last century or so of change. And I believe that one of our other coworkers, Kate, has a shelf talker, a little recommender card for this book, so it comes Village Well approved. The third book I want to recommend to people is a book called The Pyrocene, How We Created an Age of Fire and What Happens Next by Stephen J. Pyne. And I would say that this book pairs really well with the last book I just mentioned, Fire Weather, but it's more of the academic version of that book. So for any of you academia nerds out there, this is my pick for you. It came out in 2015 with the University of California Press. And Pyne's argument, the idea that he really puts forth, is that we're now living in a Pyrocene, the age of fire, which he kind of posits as a distinct ecological age that is much like the Anthropocene. Like the Anthropocene in the sense that it is a discrete period in time with its own ecology different from the past. So I would recommend this book to people who like kind of ecological philosophy and theory and are interested in more of an academic take on things. The fourth book I want to recommend is going to take us away from academia and a little bit back towards popular nonfiction. This book is called Fire in Paradise, An American Tragedy by Alastair. This book is a really, really gripping and searing account of the 2018 Camp Fire, which completely destroyed the town of Paradise near Chico in Northern California. And like I mentioned, I grew up in Sacramento, which is really not too far from this region. And the Camp Fire in 2018, I was still living at home there, was really the ecological disaster that really changed my perspective on the world, on the climate, on kind of the changes that wildfires are going under. And I would say this book is really people-centric. It's about narrative, personal stories. It follows the stories of the victims of the fires, the firefighters who tried to stop the Camp Fire, and towards the end of the book, the legal struggle of fire victims' fight against PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, who were held kind of largely culpable for the reason why this fire broke out. And I really recommend this book, again, for anyone who's interested in kind of the human dimension of fire disasters. The last book that I want to recommend is different than all the ones that I've recommended so far. It's Obie Kaufmann's book, The State of Fire, Why California Burns. And this is a book about the ecology of fire in California, but what makes it unique is that Kaufmann is both a writer and an artist, known for these really beautiful watercolor atlases of California ecology. So while this is still an ecological text, and it is mostly comprised of words and text, it's also really full of these beautiful atlases and sketches and field drawings that are done in watercolor, that he's done all of it. So I really recommend this for people who are visual, who love these kinds of maps and atlases and artistic renderings of scientific ideas.
Great. Well, Avery, thanks so much for coming by. We really appreciate you giving our listeners some resources to learn more about fires and kind of what's happening on a macro scale. So thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Josh.
And finally, I wanted to finish up with a conversation about grief and get some recommendations on books to read when we're experiencing the shock, fear, sadness, and other feelings that follow loss. For that, we called a partner of ours who is an expert in this area.
I'm talking now with Molly Rosenfeld, the Chief of Staff of NWell, which is an organization we've gotten to know at Village Well because in the last 2 years, they've put on conferences that we've been the bookseller at the Skirball Center here in Los Angeles. And their work and their conferences are focused on end-of-life issues. I really want to, let's start the conversation by you telling me a little bit more about yourself and about Endwell. And then we're going to get some book recommendations from you for people who are facing grief and processing trauma.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, of course. I'm so thrilled to be here. So a little bit about me. I've been at Endwell now for a little over a year, but my work in this field started, I'd like to say, back when I was 17 years old, when my father was diagnosed with a terminal illness.
Oh, wow.
So my journey in this work and this world really started early on, where I confronted my own mortality very early, grief, loss. But it was a profoundly, deeply moving experience that, of course, is why I'm on this trajectory that I'm on today. I was searching for a way to be involved in this work, and ultimately Endwell is where I landed. And what captured me was the storytelling, the narrative storytelling around these deeply personal stories of, again, grief, loss, and I wanted to be a part of it.
Oh, that's so interesting. And when we think about these fires, not very many people actually lost their lives in the fires relative to the size of the disaster that it was, but there was so much loss. People have, when you lose your home, you lose your sense of security, and you lose you fear you might lose your memories because you lose all these items that help us to remember what came before. So I have found personally, just being in places in the city this week and thinking about neighborhoods where I had been with people who I loved who are no longer with me. Like, it's triggered I wasn't involved anyway directly in the fires, but just as any member of the community, we're all feeling this sense of loss. So I think a lot of people are going to be processing this for a long time. And so we'd love to give them some resources for how to do that. So what are some books that you would recommend that people read to help them process the traumatic feelings and the feelings of loss that they're experiencing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start by saying any of Claire Bidwell Smith's books, I highly recommend. She is actually local to Los Angeles. She's in Santa Monica, California. And her book, Anxiety, The Missing State of Grief, I really appreciated, because for me, the connection between grief and anxiety was a connection I hadn't necessarily made for myself. And so I think as folks are navigating this extreme, unknown and loss, again, feelings of anxiety may come up. And so for me, I didn't think that my anxiety was related to my grief, and boy, was I wrong.
Yeah.
So Claire's book hugely helped me move through that. It was beautiful and also very much practical and giving me steps
Excellent.
to help. Yeah, so that I love. Also, very different book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Frances Weller. It's Rituals of Renewal and the Sacred Work of Grief. It's really beautiful and more poetic and philosophical, I would say. And again, I love all these different doorways into grief, right? I really like the emphasis on communal mourning and collective grieving. And I think that's something that's happening on a large scale right now, this collective grief.
Definitely.
And that grief is an integral part of life, and making space for that sorrow. So that was a very impactful book as well. Similar to that, but a bit more personal in its approach is, you probably know, Bearing the Unbearable by Joanne Cacciatore. Dr. Cacciatore is a bereavement educator and researcher and a Zen priest. And so it's a beautiful personal journey into, again, embracing grief. And it's just beautiful. Another book that I love, and she's a past speaker at Endwell, What Looks Like Bravery by Laurel Braitman. Also really beautiful, a memoir about her life and also, her experience with her father being diagnosed with a terminal illness, as well as the effects of prolonged grief. And I do have a few more. I was thinking about, especially for people who are looking to maybe understand the science behind it. I'm not sure if you've read The Grieving Brain by Mary Frances O'Connor, but that one is great, especially if you're looking to understand how is grief affecting my body? How is it affecting my brain? Like, what's the science behind it? And sometimes that's helpful.
Yeah. We're all just finding ourselves, our bodies and our brains working differently. And to be able to put a finger on that and say, oh, it's doing something that's expected. I'm not a freak because of these feelings I'm having.
Exactly. Well, and speaking to that what you just said, I think what's really important in these times is self-compassion.
Yes.
And it's really easier said than done. And Kristen Neff has written a number of books on self-compassion that I highly recommend. It's through the lens of, mindfulness, but I believe the book is Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. But especially in these moments when you may be experiencing all different sorts of emotions or behaviors or attitudes, it's so important just to cultivate that self-compassion, and to be there for yourself and to support yourself. And I just believe that tool is one of the most important.
I agree. It's easy to be hard on yourself when you're not yourself, and you just don't have the resources that you normally walk through life with. And it's easy to get hard on yourself at those moments.
Yeah, it is. So if we talk about these things more openly, it invites more discovery and conversation with your friends and loved ones that open the door just to more meaningful connection.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It opens the door to more meaningful connection. And that's what we're always trying to do at Village Well, is help people to discover the ideas that they need to learn about and explore and talk to each other about, to help them, go back out into the world and feel a little bit stronger.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. And I'm looking forward to doing more work with Endwell in the future. Maybe we'll curate an author event of some sort or series at the store in addition to the conference.
That would be amazing. Yeah. Yes. And we are, we are so thrilled to share that we are going to be back in Los Angeles this year.
What's the date of your next conference?
For Endwell. So Endwell 2025, save the date. It's November 20th, 2025.
Great.
So we're really excited, again, to be in community with each other, to support one another and process all that is happening together.
On this planet. Yeah.
On this whole planet. Yeah.
At this time and always. All right. Thanks, Molly.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for listening to this week's episode. We know it's a bit of a departure, but we thought it was important to talk about what's going on here that's affecting our community.
Right.
Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
If you'd like more information from us, check out the show notes or send us an email at podcast@villagewell.com. You can always order the books mentioned through our website. This episode of the Village Well podcast is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee. It was produced and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. See you next week, and keep reading.